everybody. Georgi used to do Tom's job properly. They're making their own jokes because I didn't say Tom did it badly. So we've got history, but in a work and professional capacity only. Do you want to tell them what you did to get to where you are now?
Okay, my history background is financial services, so I worked for Nationwide Building Society for over 20 years. My husband sadly had a very rare cancer and passed away in 2009, and I was very much at that junction in my life of not knowing what to do. Do I just slip back into my old role, continue in financial services? But I saw a job advertised, a new role at the hospice, which was their first community fundraiser, and I thought, sod it, why don't I just apply for it and see what happens. My husband was a patient under the hospice. I cared for him at home, but the hospice gave us a lot of support. I had 2 young children when he died. So I applied for this job and got the job. And I worked at the hospice for about 6.5 years. And it really was an important part of my journey to kind of give back and to immerse myself in everything that the hospice does. So it was myself, Paul and Mark that actually set up this networking group many years ago when it was at the Wheatsheaf Network. I'm still heavily involved with the hospice, but I was at that stage really in my life that I needed to close the chapter on the book and move on. So I went and worked for a national children's charity for a year, became a little bit disillusioned. It wasn't the same as the hospice, which obviously, you know, was going to be a very difficult thing to match because of my personal journey. So I came out of the sector for a while and ended up actually managing a gym in Farnham for a year, just helping the owner out there to get his business up to the level that he wanted. And then decided it was time for me to go back into the sector. So joined Alzheimer's Research UK over 5 years ago. I work from home, always have done. Our head office is in Cambridge, and I used to travel back and forwards to Cambridge from time to time. In that 5 years, though, I've had quite a lot of personal drama. In 2019, I found out that I had 2 large tumours in my liver. So had a liver resection in 2019, which went very badly wrong, and I was critically ill. I was on the critical list 3 times. I died officially once, and yeah, it took a long time to recover. My employers, AI UK, were incredible. And then last year, on February the 2nd last year, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I've spent the last year getting over breast cancer, but again, through the support of my employers, I'm here today. In fact, it was a year ago in a couple of days that I had my first surgery. Had 2 lots of surgery and ongoing treatment, and I'm now a huge advocate for the breast cancer community. So I have a blog. I was up in London last night at the National Radiographers Awards because my blog was used by an organisation called Rad Chat, and they won an award. So my life's a bit bonkers. I also, in 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, decided to set up a running club in town. So I set up a running club, Farnham Town Running Club. So anyone who wants to talk about running, come and see me.
I think you've got lots of potential people in
yeah.
nodding.
Yeah.
John's
and actually,
up for it.
if I take a step back, in 2014, there's one person in this room who is entirely responsible for my running, because I am not a runner. But at a networking event at the Wheatsheaf, after a few too many bottles of fizz, Red Mist had a running club team called Red Mist Runners who had taken on the challenge of doing Fleet Half Marathon. And I woke up the next morning thinking, what the bloody hell have I agreed to do? I've agreed to do a half marathon. So set on the trail of learning how to actually run for a reason. And in fact, I think to date, I'm probably the only one from the team who's still running. Is that true, Mark? Yeah.
Probably is about right.
Yeah. So back in...
I still very clearly remember us being pretty much the last 2 in the field.
Yeah, it was. I think I did beat you, but I think Julian. Yeah, it was all but those mad things. But anyway, since then I've now, as I say, set up a running club. We're based at our Farnham Town Football Club. Got just over 100 members now. I'm an England athletics qualified coach as well. So as you can probably tell, my life is a little bit bonkers, but that's what makes me me. My role now with Alzheimer's Research UK is I'm very fortunate to work for such an incredible organisation. Our chief executive, Hilary, is in her mid-30s. She's got 3 young children, and she, really leads from the front. And as an organisation, we bring a lot of hope for the future for such a terrible disease that affects so many people. And, we really are an incredible organisation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more background onto me. Yeah.
That was very brief, Georgie.
That's a bit of a brief one. But I mean, anyone that knows me knows that, for me, life is about living and it's about giving back. And, not just in my job, but, my personal life, it's very much about, I'm very much a giver. I do forget myself quite often. And, I don't put myself first. But, I've got 2 boys. My eldest lives in Farnham and my youngest lives in Edinburgh. They've both gone on to have, they've both got law degrees. My youngest has now just graduated with a master's at Edinburgh University in global environmental law and climate change. So from what seemed like quite a bleak position that we were in back in 2009 when my husband died, he was just 39. Now I look back and I think, well, everything that we've achieved, not just me, but my family and the boys, I know that, I've done the right thing.
Always do the right thing, Georgie. As you know, we have fairly similar things occurred in our lives along the way. This is probably why we talk so often, or not in between gaps. So you've moved on to Alzheimer's UK. Now, when I was young, Alzheimer's didn't seem to exist, and dementia didn't exist. So awareness, I suspect, across the group, not just me, because I'm clearly ignorant, is a little bit light. So can you tell us a little bit about what Alzheimer's is?
So historically, years ago, you would be very much along the lines of an elderly relative would lose their memory, all those kinds of things that we know that is part and parcel of dementia. And most people, sort of many years ago, it would be, Aunt Flo's gone a bit loopy. And donkeys years ago, people would be put in sanatoriums, and it was considered to be a mental illness. What we know now, though, is dementia is not a mental condition, it is a physical disease. And we know that what happens in the brain affects what then happens across the body. So the word dementia is basically an umbrella term for a number of symptoms. And those symptoms can be from memory loss, putting things in the wrong place, navigation problems. It can be change of personality. It can be physical impairment and mobility changes. So dementia is just a word that is basically an umbrella term for a number of symptoms. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease was found many years ago by Dr. Alzheimer, and that's a particular course that happens in the brain, so particular changes. So Alzheimer's disease accounts for about 1 in 3 cases of dementia. So dementia and Alzheimer's are part and parcel the same thing. You will then have different forms of dementia. So obviously a couple of weeks ago, Bruce Willis and his family came out with his frontal temporal dementia diagnosis. And frontal temporal is literally as it sounds, it's all to do with the frontal lobe. And quite often the early signs and symptoms of that is speech asphasia, so struggling to get your words out. And again, it can deal a lot of emotion because a lot of your emotions are held in the front temporal of your brain. Then got things like vascular dementia, so that's all to do with the circulatory system, and that's very much aligned with people who might have diabetes or heart disease, so that is literally a reduced blood flow to the brain. And then you've got some of the more uncommon types of dementia as well. So there's lots of different diagnoses. You do get some people who would be diagnosed with what is called mixed dementia, so they might have an Alzheimer's and a vascular dementia diagnosis. So you can actually be affected by more than one, but ultimately dementia is just an umbrella term for a number of symptoms.
So obviously treatments have changed and you work for the charity. So in what way are treatments currently in existence? And I guess what does the charity hope to do in the future?
So currently there is no drug on the UK market that is disease altering or will change the course of the disease. There's a number of drugs on the market that manage and mask the symptoms, and most people will take those, and for a period of time it will seem to work really well, and often people will say, oh, they've gone back, you know, they're a lot better. Ultimately, that doesn't change the underlying disease, and most of the time those drugs will last for a short period of time because the brain then finds a way around those. So on the UK market at the moment, there is no medication that you can take that changes the progression or halts it or even reverses. But there is huge hope. So in America last year, a drug called aducanumab was approved by the FDA for use in the American marketplace. It's very difficult when you compare the American market, drugs market and health industry to the UK industry. It's all about money in America, whereas, you know, for us, we have to be a lot more cautious. And that did come to the UK to go through the clinical trials and to be put forward to actually be approved as a licensed drug in the UK, and that didn't happen. There's good reasons why that didn't happen, though. The trials were quite controversial. Some of the potential side effects and risks were quite high, things like brain bleeds and strokes. But in the American marketplace, if they think it might change, they'll take it. The other thing is the economic factor when a drug comes to market, and we work very closely with the London School of Economics, with the government, with NICE and with the NHS to make sure that when a drug does come to market, that it's economically viable as well. You know, there's no point us saying, right, here's an amazing drug, but actually we can't afford it and you can't access it. So that drug wasn't approved for use in the UK. But that was a huge stepping stone and a massive element of hope because it did show disease-altering properties. So you had an MRI of somebody before taking it, and then 6 months later there was effective changes in the MRI, so you could see disease-altering. That stepping stone has now built onto a new drug called lecanemab, and again, this is a drug that is shown even better and more promising hope. Again, it's disease-altering, so it actually changes what's happened in the brain and has, you know, shown effect to come back. Again, that's currently within the European drugs licensing to look if the European licensing will approve it. Quite often, if the European market approves something, it will then, you know, it's much more likely to be approved in the UK. Again, there'll always be controversy. One of the biggest factors, though, with any drug, any illness, is it needs to be used on people early diagnosis, which is difficult. And unfortunately, at the moment, the drug is administered through infusion, so it's not a tablet, so it takes up physical nursing time, etc., to deliver. And obviously, it's high cost. So all of those factors have to be taken into consideration before a drug comes to market. But the great thing is, if you look to the fact that in the matter of not even 2 years, there's been 2 drugs that are showing to actually change the disease in the brain, that is massive, absolutely huge. You cannot underestimate the fact that this is starting to happen, and the only reason that's happened is because of investment and research, and that's the biggest issue. Historically, there's not been enough money invested into dementia research. Still today in the UK, for every 1 dementia researcher, you've got 4 cancer researchers. So it's very, very underfunded. And, you know, there's a, you know, the government for their, you know, pre-election campaign promised to deliver on dementia research. That's still not come to fruition. If they delivered 1%, if they invested 1% of the cost of dementia to the UK economy and, you know, into dementia research, that would make a huge, huge difference. So it's really important. Part of our role, as well as funding research, we do a lot of policy work, and we do a lot of work with the government, and we continue pushing the political, you know, talk and campaigning to get more investment, because economically it costs the UK economy about £25 billion a year for dementia. That is more than the cost of cancer and heart disease combined. So it's crazy. You can't keep putting a sticky plaster on it and ignoring the fact that this is a problem that is only going to get worse, and the cost of the economy is going to rise and rise and rise because the more people that are, who are diagnosed, people living longer, it's a huge impact. 1 in 4 hospital beds are currently taken up by somebody living with a dementia diagnosis. That's a huge impact on society. So, yeah, investment is massively important.
So, interestingly, at the moment, we're all getting older, we're getting more and more diseases that I guess in many ways the human body wasn't designed for. Is there any way of prolonging it, preventing it, self-care?
Yeah, absolutely. So most people's conception or most people's idea of what dementia is that it's an old person's disease. And obviously, as a population, we are living longer. But sadly, it is not it's not a disease of the old. I'm working with families. We've got a young guy, Jordan, who's running the London Marathon again for us this year. He's in his early 20s, and historically, his family have had, now they look back, clear cases of quite a rare form of dementia, and he decided to have the genetic testing, and he is, sadly, he is predisposed to getting dementia, and he will be at his late stages, probably by the age of 40. So it's not just an old person's disease. I'm working with a family at the moment. He's 62, first signs and symptoms probably 10 years ago. So from early signs and symptoms and going through to diagnosis can take a long time. But most people, if we asked on the street, what can you do to reduce your risk of cancer and heart disease, most people would have a good, exercise, all the rest of it. If you ask people, what can you do to prevent dementia or help support your brain health, most people really wouldn't have a clue. They'd say, oh, do puzzles, do Sudoku, that kind of stuff. Yes, that's important to keep your brain active, but social interaction and engagement is massively important. Exercise and eating a healthy diet, all of those things will support your brain health and reduce your risk. So you can do things to reduce your risk. People are just not aware of that. And we have a campaign called Think Brain Health. And part of our campaign is really about, raising that awareness within people to realise that you can do something about it. It's not just a predisposition by getting old, or if somebody in your family has had a form of dementia, that doesn't mean that you will go on to develop dementia at all. And it's not a flick of the coin, 50-50 chance. There's lots you can do to help reduce your risk.
So what does the future hold for you? Because obviously this is only going to get bigger. Mm-hmm. So what are your plans?
Me personally?
You can do both. I couldn't stop you anyway.
No. So as an organisation, we're not a big organisation, so most people would probably put us in the same sort of field as somewhere like Cancer Research or Miller and those kinds of organisations which are very publicly branded. We actually only have 250 staff. Most people would expect, well, we've got a massive staff. We don't. We run a tight ship. We don't waste any money at all. All of our energy goes to the end cause, to pushing about, policy and driving change. So for us as an organisation, this year we've got a rebrand or a refresh coming, and we're going very bold. I think we've learnt over the last few years, especially with COVID, a lot of our dementia researchers at the point of COVID were, labs were shut, so they went and worked within the COVID side of things. And I think we've learned that actually, the messages that came out of that was, we have to do something about it and we have to do about it now, is that we've kind of now decided as an organisation to go a lot more bold and, to really say, this is not good enough anymore. We have to make change. So we've got a refresh coming out in a couple of months, which will, really start to push the boundaries and the barriers. We're back to delivering on events. Obviously we've got we've got a big London Marathon team again this year, so we'll, that's really good for us. We've got Scott Mitchell, who's Barbara Windsor's husband. He's a huge supporter of us. So we've got Babs Army, so a lot of the EastEnders cast are all running for us for the London Marathon. And people like that, are really important to us because, they've been at the face of it, and, they understand that ultimately the only thing that's going to change the course of this disease and the future for generations is investment into research. We know today that 1 in 3 babies born today will go on to develop dementia if we don't do something about it. And interestingly, David Cameron is actually our president, which, you know, some people find is a bit controversial, but actually the work that he's done, and he doesn't really shout about it, but the work he's done over the last, you know, X amount of years has been absolutely incredible, and he is really, really, really pushing the buttons and continuing to use his voice to get investment, but also to make a lot of change in the background with the political side of things. And, you know, people can, you know, his mum might love or hate him, but actually for us, he's doing a lot of work. He's bringing a lot of money into the organisation. So that's one side. We've got a lot of exciting things as well. So we've got a project called EDON, which is called the Early Detection of Neurodegenerative Diseases, and mainly with a focus on Alzheimer's and dementia. Things like Parkinson's and MND kind of come under that umbrella as well. And that's very much about collecting lots of bits of micro data. So I'm sure if I look around the room, there's lots of people with wearables, with smartwatches. And EDON is very much about collecting lots and lots of bits of tiny micro data from how you sleep, how you walk, all sorts of different things. We can use different sorts of wearable technology as well, so headsets and, you know, electrons and all sorts. And that collects lots and lots of bits of data, and that's all mapped through, and it can start to show very small changes. And in those small changes, it can then go on to show that actually potentially there may be something changing in the brain that could go on to lead to a dementia diagnosis. And that's really, really exciting. But it's also quite scary because currently you go to the GP, there is no cure for dementia. So do you want to know about it earlier on? It's a real chicken and egg situation. But EDON as a project has been backed by Bill Gates. He's invested $100 million into it. So we work globally. We're not working here in the UK in isolation. We work globally with, you know, some big stakeholders and are investing across the world in projects like EDON, which, you know, hopefully will bring on a better form of diagnosis, because diagnosis is a huge issue, and then bring on that data to then, once we've got the drug, to be able to administer drugs at an earlier stage, which hopefully will potentially just completely stop it in its tracks. And as David Cameron talks about it, you know, he talks about people take statins now, and we want a drug like a statin in the same form, that you take that drug every day, you've had a predisposition, there's shown some evidence. You know, you go to the GP because your cholesterol's high and you've got high blood pressure, you get given a statin. You go to the GP with possible signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, you get given the equivalent of a statin. That's what we want as an organisation.
What haven't I asked you? It's always a question I always get asked. What haven't you told me? What have we missed?
I don't know, really. Should we open it out to them?
I was going to say.
People to ask.
Yeah. Any questions for this young lady? You've stunned them into silence, Georgie.
You talk about early signs. What, you know, if you are in your 30s and your 40s, would be the early signs?
So, most people who get diagnosed either early onset or, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s or whatever, most people recognise the signs and symptoms, you know, little things that they do themselves, but it's quite often not the individual who's living with that, it's their partner, their loved ones who notice. But how do you broach that conversation to say, okay, people talk about the classic things, putting your keys in the fridge or getting lost, all those kinds of things. Those are the sorts of signs and symptoms. I spoke to a lady earlier this week, and she said her husband should sit down for dinner and he'd have a knife and fork in his dinner plate, and he said, where's my knife and fork? And she's like, what do you mean? It's there in front of you. And he couldn't process, and the brain wasn't functioning in the right way for him to get the fact that his knife and fork were there. So it's not just about forgetting someone's name. It's not just about forgetting where you are and what you're doing there. Or like I do, I go upstairs and think, what have I come upstairs for? You know, as we get older, our memory changes anyway. We degenerate in the same way as our physical bodies do. So those sorts of things will change anyway. It's those repeated things. It's quite often a loved one will notice that someone's repeated the same thing over and over again, and you're like, bloody hell, you said that 5 minutes ago.
That sounds like my life for the last 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always women, isn't it? And that's an interesting one. Sadly, women have a higher predisposition to dementia than men. A lot of that can be due to hormonal factors. So you talk about women in menopause who have brain fog. That's a reduction of hormones, so estrogen, particularly as a driver for memory. So women do have a higher risk of dementia.
Do we know why? Is Alzheimer's done any investigation as to why women
Yeah.
are more susceptible?
Yeah, so a lot of that is down to hormonal factors. A lot of it is women in general are impacted by dementia much more than men, not just by actually having the physical disease themselves, but also for the fact that if you have your husband, partner has a dementia diagnosis, women will then end up being the carers. So actually the impact on women in the whole dementia spectrum is far greater than men. I'm not putting men down here, but most men with women with a female diagnosis, a man will manage it for so long and then get to the stage where they'll feel that care home and care provision is greater. More women will care for their loved ones at home for a longer period of time. But yeah, so things like hormonal factors are huge. And that's another reason why a lot of women still choose to take HRT, because actually those hormones are proven to support brain function. There's no hope for me because with my breast cancer diagnosis, one, I'm not allowed to take HRT, and I'm meant to be on a drug for 10 years that, quite frankly, I took for 5 months, and I could not function. I couldn't even make a cup of tea some days because it literally stripped all of the those hormones from my body. And I mean, it was like brain fog on steroids. I literally couldn't function at all. And I was at the stage when I thought, my God, how am I going to work? How am I going to do any of this? So sequencing. We have a programme called A Walk Through Dementia, and that's about 3 scenarios for what it's like living with dementia. And one of those is a simple task as making a cup of tea. Now, if you think about taking one element out, i.e. you don't put a tea bag in, or you don't actually click to boil the kettle, or any part of that, or you don't put the water in the kettle but you put it on to boil, take one part out of it and you don't end up with the end product. And that's what it's like for someone with dementia, that sequencing can become very difficult. Going to the supermarket, visual and sound can become very overwhelming. No disrespect, Mark, but your tiles there are not dementia friendly at all. So something like that, not so bad, but if you see sometimes when places have big black and white tiles, the black to someone living with dementia, from a visual perception point of view, can be very overwhelming because it can look like a black hole to them. So a puddle on the street can look like that, and you're like, I can't step in that because I'm going to go down a hole. So lots of things like that become very oversensitized.
I think,
Yeah, Karen?
I think most people, like I, tend to bag dementia with Alzheimer's together. We don't really understand what it is, and that's been very helpful, your explanation. I think it's also, most people, because it's dementia, in my day as a teenager, say, oh, you're demented.
Yeah.
It gets a bad name, it's kind of linked with mental illness.
Yes, yeah.
So also, I didn't realise, I thought it was a mental illness. It can be physical.
No, it's a physical disease. So we, our brand colour is orange, and we have a campaign called Share the Orange, and that's been headed up by some amazing celebrities over the years. So Christopher Ecclestone, that bloke from whatever,
I don't know.
Brian Cranston. I mean, if you're come on, someone tell me what he was in.
Breaking
That's
Bad.
the one. He's had Samuel L. Jackson. All of these people have fronted that campaign for free, so we don't pay them to do it. It's been put. Our most recent 2 years of that have been produced by Aardman Animations, again for free, and Legal and General support that campaign. And that campaign, Share the Orange, is very much about.
Yesterday, I went to a seminar for what's it called? Neurological. And I took the teacher an orange to present.
Yeah.
But it was really fun. I didn't realise that connection.
So if you think about the size of a normal, a decent size orange that you pick up in the supermarket, by the time someone's at end stage dementia or Alzheimer's, the amount of brain matter that has been destroyed is about 140 grams, which is about the size of an orange. So if you think about that function, how much function has been lost because you've lost all that brain matter. The other thing to realise, I was talking to some people earlier, is that dementia is actually the UK's biggest killer. So even throughout COVID months, there was just, some months still that dementia was at the top. People don't realise that dementia is a cause of death. So many years ago, what would be on a death certificate would be heart failure, pulmonary embolism, lung failure, etc. What caused the heart to fail, what caused the lungs to stop taking the breath, is the dementia in the brain. The disease has eradicated that function in the brain and has stopped sending the messages through. So dementia is the UK's biggest cause of death. And as I say, the only way to change that is to change, investment in research.
I am an artist, among other things, and I think a lot of it's perception and image.
Mm-hmm.
And I just come up with a name here, and I think art could help.
Yeah.
This term, I've written DART, Dementia and Alzheimer's Research Trust. I think, it's kind of an impacting name, and if I can help in any way through art, image, then I would. But I think art would help break down barriers of people's perception, as mental health now has become far more widespread, talked about, and more accepted.
And that's totally true,
really
yeah.
help.
So we know that a lot of people, you may have seen the programmes on the TV to do with singing, so that's led very much by Alzheimer's Society, which is important that I explain the difference between us as an organisation. So Alzheimer's Society, about 80%, 85% of their income goes into provision of care, so things like dementia workshops, dementia cafes, those sorts of things. And about 15% of their income goes into research. But about 8% of that 15% actually goes into research into care. So Alzheimer's Society's remit is very different from ours. The research element, as into disease research, we work collaboratively on. There's no point them investing in a project that we're, doing over here. So there's a lot of collaboration there. But Alzheimer's Society and us are two very different organisations. But, the art, singing, all those sorts of things are proven to be beneficial to somebody living with dementia. But if you imagine throughout COVID times, that social interaction and the lack of that, that was a very, very difficult time for people living with dementia. And a lot of that provision is sadly gone for people who are living with a dementia diagnosis. So it is tough. And it's tough for, carers, people who are living at home 24/7 with a loved one. I've met some incredible families, but I walk away and I think, bloody hell, that's hard going what you're doing there. This is 24/7, and it's tough to watch and to see. And the cost of care for someone with a dementia diagnosis around here, because there's not a lot of state provision out there, you're talking £2,500 a week for care.
It strikes me that most of the charitable support comes from people who have been impacted by that charitable help. You yourself got involved in Phyllis Tuckwell primarily because of the support that Phyllis Tuckwell gave to you at a time in your life. And I think the majority of people here will know people who are involved in charity, that they are charities that are personal to them.
Yeah.
And that's really what the charities are affected. We know that, and what you're saying is that dementia and Alzheimer's will impact probably a significant percentage of the people that are here and all the rest of it. But they obviously tend to be when, as you say, when it's an older disease, when their parents, grandparents are of an older thing. And obviously David Cameron, I don't know, I imagine he's got a personal impact on that as well. But obviously the support of charities very much comes from people's personal experiences, and more and more people will have that personal experience with
I think
dementia and Alzheimer's.
it's been interesting since COVID. I mean, we've continued, to be on, we had a huge growth trajectory. We were considered to be the UK's strongest and fastest growing charity over a period of time, and lots of other organisations were coming to us and saying, what are you doing? How have you, how are you so successful with such a small team as well? But we've managed to continue not on the same growth plan that we expected to do. But since COVID, I think people have started to realise a lot more that actually the power of research is incredible. We wouldn't be where we are today unless we had those people in labs and, researching to find that vaccine. That was massively important. And that's the same with dementia. So actually, even though, yes, a lot of our support comes by people that have been affected by the disease, we are seeing a lot of support from people who feel that they want to make a difference, and they understand that research charities now are massively important. What we don't have as an organisation is a massive marketing budget. You won't see us on national TV. We don't have national TV campaigns. Our marketing budget is very, very small. Our income as an organisation is about the same as Cancer Research UK's marketing budget.
I think what COVID has proven is that if enough people with enough money, with enough will to resolve a situation, things will move quickly. And I think that's what COVID has then proven, that if people put enough effort into it and money into it, you can make a difference.
And that's why we, lobby and push with the government. The government made this moonshot, promise as part of their election campaigning, and it's never been delivered on. And that's what's so important, that we need to keep driving that message to the government to say, this is costing you £26 billion a year. You're not investing at the bottom, but this is going to keep on rising and rising and rising, and actually we need to do something about it. You cannot keep putting a sticky plaster on dementia and Alzheimer's. Yeah, it is, but there is government money. The government is still investing heavily into cancer research. I've been impacted by cancer. I'm eternally grateful for that. The cancer my husband died from in 2009, there's third and fourth phase treatments available. When he was diagnosed, he was one of the first, patients of his age to be diagnosed in the UK, and there was one drug available. He was chemo-resistant, one drug available that had been used in the American market. The longest anyone had lived on it was 2 years, and he was given 2 years. He lived 7. In that time, by the time he got to year 6 and that drug failed, another drug was on the market. There's now 3, 4 drugs available. That shows in that period of time the power of research, and we need to do the same. We need to replicate that within the dementia marketplace, and we need to get the investment in there. And, every penny counts. I have school kids who do things for me and raise a few pounds, and, that's celebrated as much as our major donors who are coming and saying to me, saying to us, I want to give you £1 million. They don't happen very often. But, there are people that have got wealth. We're lucky, we live in an affluent area, but that doesn't discriminate. Just because you're wealthy, dementia does not discriminate at all. Bottom line is investment. There's no question. And that's proven because of the massive leaps that we've made in the last few years. You have no question that, that's happened because money.
I think we're getting towards the end. Anybody want to ask a final question?
Georgie, thanks for talking this morning. I think it's great that you've shared your personal journey and some of the highs and lows you've had in your life. And it's very humbling to sit and listen to it. And actually, the one thing I've always loved about throughout your life, you've had lots of personal achievements, haven't you? You know, like the running club, or you know, the 5K, couch 5K deal, or you know, various other things. What's your next personal challenge, current or next personal challenge?
So I've just applied to go on the Copperfield Trek. So Copperfield is a breast cancer charity headed up by Chris Halenga, a girl that was diagnosed in her 20s. She's now she was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, secondary breast cancer. She's now 14 years still on the planet. So Copperfield was a charity she set up, and that's very much about making people aware of breast awareness, self-checking and all that kind of stuff. So I've applied to go on their trek. They do 2 treks a year, one in the UK and one abroad. So I've applied for the trek, which is Mont Blanc, which is in September this year. I know that yesterday the UK trek announcements were going out, so people are getting that. So I'm tentatively keep refreshing my emails, hoping that I get on that trek. So that will be good. Sadly, throughout the last few years, I've had big challenges that I've put ahead. So I wanted to do Everest Base Camp a few years ago, and that was the year I was diagnosed with my liver tumours. And then last year I was due to do Kilimanjaro with work. I was meant to be taking a team out for AIUK to Kili, and then I got diagnosed with breast cancer. So I'm hoping that if I get on this trek, this is 3rd time lucky for doing that. I love to be out and about. I can think of nothing better than to be trekking up a mountain. So yeah, some of those sorts of challenges over the next few years, to climb some mountains. Personally, I've just had my 1-year screening, so I've just had all my MRIs and everything, and I've just had my 1 year all clear. So 5 years is the pinnacle, 10 years is the ultimate post-diagnosis. So yeah, and really I'm a massive supporter of the secondary breast cancer community. You know, people don't die of primary breast cancer, they die of secondary breast cancer. Sadly, we lost a girl, Mickey, on Sunday. She was 29, died of secondary breast cancer. It's a crappy, horrible disease. I will continue making people aware of self-examination, check-in. I've got a ridiculous Instagram called Booby Business, where, I've shared my journey. I'm doing some work with the National Association of Radiographers on therapeutic radiography. I've done a few podcasts this year with some various cancer organisations. So yeah, for me, my personal journey is, just to keep on living, really.
Well, let's show our appreciation of this young lady in a normal manner.